background. Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. My name is Shonda Harris. I am with the Columbus Small Business Administration, and we'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Today is Thursday, July 29th, and today's webinar is going to be featuring on cybersecurity awareness training. This is actually part 2. Hopefully some of you were able to join us 2 weeks ago when we had the first session. So we're looking forward to following up on that training. And today's session will focus on cybersecurity maturity model certification requirements for level 3. And we'll also focus on the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, better known as NIST. We are grateful that you are able to join us. We had quite a few people to register, and we don't take it lightly anytime those of you register for our trainings. Today's training is a collaborative effort between the SBA and the PTAC, the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. So if you are looking to do business with the government, or if you're already doing business with the government and you're just trying to stay updated with the latest requirements as it relates to cybersecurity, you are in the right place. If you are just getting started as it relates to finding out how to do business with the government, you're still in the right place. And actually the Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, or PTACs, are the wonderful organization that can help you to do that. We never take for granted that those of you that may join us, you may be at different phases and stages of your government contracting journey. And so the PTAC is here and will give you a little bit of background information so that you can know all of the wonderful things that we do. We love our PTACs. And so we have the director of the Ohio University PTAC, Ms. Sharon Hopkins. And Sharon will share a little bit about PTAC and all of the great things that they do. Sharon?
Morning. Thank you, Shonda. Welcome, everyone. I hope today you'll learn a good bit about cybersecurity. Lauren is a great presenter. He's presented for us in the past, and he does a wonderful job. So the PTAC stands for Procurement Technical Assistance Center, and we are funded at no cost to Ohio businesses to help you look at the government market. And when I say that, I mean to evaluate if it would work for you, as well as we have a bid match system that can notify you of bids that are out there, as well as sources sought notices and requests for information that the government puts out there multiple times a day. And each day you and your the information we input about your company using codes and keywords would match with what the government is buying. And you would see that in your daily email. There would be a link for you to see all of the things you match with. Beyond that, we also can assist with doing some history, looking at history for you, and looking at what the government's buying and who's buying what. And when I say who, I'm talking about the different agencies. So we're able to help you figure out, if you don't already have an idea, which agencies buy your type of product or service. We help all businesses, service companies, as well as manufacturing companies. And we also work with, the government agencies. We sometimes have really good connections and, work with them to bring you training, as well as maybe to help you get a step up when it's the right point in time for you. We look at, we also assist with helping you develop capability statements, which is something the government will ask you for right away when you start reaching out. And those are basically a resume about your company. And so we help you get those together so that the right data is there. And then we help you walk through the process. Once you find bids, we can look at the solicitation package with you and help you understand, what's important to recognize, what, if you get this, what that means, certain clauses might mean, and, what that means you would have to do for that particular contract. Sometimes it's the clauses in there about, I don't know, I can't think of one right now off the top of my head, but there's multiple clauses that anything different, we would try to point out to you. And then we would also point you in the right direction of how to evaluate that solicitation, to look at the statement of work, to respond to that particular solicitation. And then we can look over your proposal once you've developed it to see if there's any glaring holes, anything we think you should fix. And then in the end, if you're awarded the contract, most of the post-award things we get involved in is helping you get paid, because often you skip over that in the solicitation and it'll tell you it's the wide area workflow, payment system, or multiple different payment systems, and we can help you get in those systems and supply your invoices. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do. And in addition to all of that, we host and partner with SBA quite often to host training seminars like the one that you will be seeing today with Lauren. So with that, I will go back to Shonda.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for giving a background about PTAC. So for those of you, as Sharon said, regardless of what stage you're in, beginning of looking for a contract, in the middle, or at the end, PTAC is the go-to resource to be able to assist you. Just to give a little housekeeping items before we introduce our speaker today. Today's session is being recorded. And so the link for today's session and the link for last week should be posted on PTAC's site by next week. And we will provide that link for you in the chat so that you can, if you want to access the training afterward. And then also, if you do have a question while Lauren, our speaker, is presenting, we ask that you do type it in the chat, and we will actually, at a good point, we will ask Lauren the question and he can address that and answer your question as we go along. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today for Centricom, and he actually did the webinar last week and he's doing it also again this week. And Lauren is actively engaged in helping organizations become more secure and compliant by performing risk assessments and advisory services based on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, NIST SP 800-171, and the DoD Cybersecurity Maturity Model, CMMC program. And Lauren has designed a CMC registered practitioner. Prior to joining Centricom, Lauren held global senior management positions for a major manufacturer in information security, networking, and data center operations. Lauren is a respected expert in his field and has presented papers and provided dozens of presentations to organizations regarding risk mitigation, cybersecurity, and information technology. Lauren has a doctorate in information assurance from the University of Fairfax and an MBA from the University of Finland and a certificate of security management from the National Defense University. He's a part-time lecturer at the University of Finland, for over the past 20 years, and he's played a major role in the development of their information assurance programs. So we have a very seasoned presenter for today. So with that said, we're going to turn it over to Lauren, and you can take it away from here.
All right. Well, thank you, Shanda, and thank you, Sharon. And good morning to everybody. I'm happy to be here this morning, and I also want to thank the PTAC and the Small Business Administration and Ohio University for their support and allowing me to share this information with you this morning. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And there's a presentation in here somewhere. Okay. And okay, so we can go ahead and get started then. So I'm trying to, there we go. Okay, getting to slide mode here, and we can stop that as well. Okay, so yeah, this is a part of cybersecurity awareness, and today specifically we'll be talking about the CMMC model, cybersecurity maturity model certification, and NIST 800-171, how this plays into this. So from an agenda perspective, we'll be talking a little bit about the threat overview, the CMMC, as I mentioned, the NIST interim rule that was put into place at towards the end of last year, the end of November of last year. We'll talk some about the Supplier Performance Risk System, SPRS, some CMMC updates, 800-171 implementation, and we'll also talk about 800-171A, which is the tool that helps you to assess your implementation and your system security plan, which we'll be talking about as well. So this comment here probably isn't a surprise to most of you that are attending this webinar today. And small businesses certainly aren't immune to cyber attacks and data breaches, and they are often targeted just because of the fact that they're small and often don't have a very mature security program in place that leaves them open to attack. And sometimes these attacks can be particularly devastating depending on the nature of the attack and your security implementation. Certainly in the news, we see things like Colonial and Kaseya and some of the other big ones, but from a statistic perspective, the small guys are getting hit frequently as well. Now, in the manufacturing realm, it's one of the most aggressively targeted industries for cyber attacks, but the focus largely is on espionage and gathering information from manufacturers in order to steal intellectual property and trade secrets. And we'll see a couple of examples of that. So this really all comes down to cyber hygiene and basic cyber hygiene. And as this slide points out, involves such things as patching known vulnerabilities, proper configuration management, and one example of that would be just eliminating things on a system, say on a laptop, for example, that don't have to be there, such as default accounts, for example, which is often a point of entry, and management of administrative privileges. And specifically what we're talking about there is people that their account on their laptop, again, for example, has administrative privileges when typically it doesn't need to. but by the fact that you're running with those privileges, if you do have a security event or a ransomware event, for example, you're leaving your laptop wide open to the bad guys. So almost all successful attacks can tie back to basically the poor cyber hygiene. And here's some statistics that help support that. So 57% of data breaches are attributed to poor patch management or in general software updates, and in particular third-party software, not just the operating system, but third-party software you might have on your laptop or other systems, such as Adobe products, for example. I'm not just picking on Adobe, but that's one of the biggies. 74% of data breaches start with privileged credential abuse, and that goes back to that administrative privilege or being able to obtain an account within an organization that has administrative privileges. And then on the cloud side, vast majority of the errors there are configuration errors, and we hear about those, rather frequently when we see an abuse, for example, with servers that are being hosted within like an AWS environment. Here's an example of where some of these espionage attacks get us, what the result is of those. And this particularly is talking about the F-35 fighter jet. And in this case, it was known that China obtained more than 50 terabytes of data from US defense and government contractors and private contractors, including design and technology in Beijing's new stealth jet, the J-20. There was more than 1,600 network computers that were penetrated, and at least 600,000 user accounts were compromised. An estimated damage for this one program was in the $100 million range. Here's another example referring to China's KJ-600 plane and its resemblance to one of America's, specifically the E-2D. And the advantage that China gets from that information, from that data that's been stolen, and in their ability to help them, in the event of any future warfare. So this is a quote from Katie Arrington, and you may have heard her name in relationship to the CMMC program. Katie being a Department of Defense representative, and she says, "Who's the government?" Well, you are the government when you're the taxpayer, and that's your money. That's your data that you've paid for, that our adversaries are taking and using it against us. And we should be infuriated as a nation about our data. With 600 billion a year being expelled by our adversaries, this room should be irate. And in the room she's talking to, of course, is she was speaking at this Professional Services Council Federal Acquisition Conference here a couple of years ago. And then besides the loss of tax dollars, of course, there's the likely possibility of just losing the competitive edge in products, especially in the defense area where this is referring to. So starting back a little bit, this brings us really to the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-171. This was published several years ago and contains the requirements for protecting CUI data, or confidentiality of control and classified information. And this was rolled out requiring defense contractors to implement this control program and be able to demonstrate their provisioning of adequate security to protect covered defense information, as required by the DFARS Clause 252.204-7012. but you'll certainly be hearing more about that. So this requirement said if a manufacturer is part of DoD, GSA, General Services Administration, or NASA or other federal or state agencies supply chain, they were required to implement 800-171. And this requirement was really in place as of December 2017. And the expectation there was that all contractors or all organizations in the defense supply chain that were managing CUI data would be completely, 100% completely in line with 800-171 and the 110 controls that make up 800-171. But as it turns out, the estimate was less than 1% of the more than 300,000 estimated in the defense industrial base that actually complied. And there's a number of reasons why this occurred. One being, requiring a self-assessment, attestment, a lack of understanding of what these requirements really meant in terms of technology implementation and organizational requirements, business requirements, and also the thought by many that here was another thing that the government was requiring that would eventually just go away. So we really didn't have to pay attention to it. But because of the lack of implementation of 800-171, largely that's what introduced CMMC. And the CMMC says all companies conducting business, again, with the DoD, must be certified by a third-party auditor, assessor. So what we came from was an environment where the Department of Defense was saying, we're relying on you to implement these controls in 800-171 and to provide us a self-attestment that you are implementing them. And also, if they're not completely implemented, what's your plan for doing so? And what's the expectation for executing, completing that plan? And this then, the CMMC then became a certification model. So the self-attestment was no longer valid, and that at some point an organization that was going to be awarded a contract within the Department of Defense and other agencies would actually have an assessment done by a third-party assessment organization attesting that they were in fact compliant. The final release of the CMMC was in March of 2020, March of last year. And then the important point here is that there's a guaranteed loss of business if the certification is not met. So in other words, when it comes time for a contract to be awarded, the expectation is that certification will be in place, or the organization would not, in fact, be awarded the contract. So a significant impact on an organization's business. So the accreditation body, the CMMC accreditation body, was established in January 2020. They are a nonprofit organization that supports the CMMC activities in conjunction with the Department of Defense. There's assessors that will be certified, the third-party assessment organization, C3PAO. And then we also have what's registered practitioners and registered provider organizations. And these are mutually exclusive functions. In other words, a company, an organization, a consulting firm that assists a contractor in the defense industrial base in obtaining or implementing the requirements for CMMC cannot also do the final assessment or the audit for certification. The organization, the company, the consulting group can do both. They can help companies reach what they need to have in place for certification, but they can't also do the assessment, or they can do the assessment but not have been the organization that helped them get there. Whoops. Hang on just 1 second, please. I hit the link in the presentation instead of the slide. Bear with me for 1 moment. Okay, sorry about that. I got unintentionally clicked on the link at the bottom of the slide. So here's an overview of what the accreditation body looks like in terms of structure, and then the areas that they are directly involved in. So you have the oversight body that is responsible for dispute resolution and capturing metrics, and then you have these 5 areas that they're responsible for: training, infrastructure, support systems, so knowledge store, marketplace. Marketplace is where you can go look up who are registered providers, who are registered practitioners, who are C3PAO organizations. Accreditation, credentialing, and then assessment operations. So those are areas that the CMMC AB are responsible for. And this slide is, the slide itself is the latest slide that shows this progression of activities. So you see number 1 is formation, and you go all the way over to the right on number 7, where it talks about commercial assessments available in winter, spring this year. Well, that hasn't occurred yet. They are still in the process of establishing training organizations that will provide training for assessors to become certified assessors. There are 2 organizations currently that have been given C3PAO status, but they are not yet qualified to do assessments. And in fact, there are no trained assessors at this point either. So that has slowed down the program quite a bit, as you can imagine, and there really is no date at this point when that activity is going to actually take place and be available for organizations to get assessed. And this is just an overview of what it would look like for organizations seeking certification. And you see here certified assessors, registered practitioners, certified professionals. The only thing on this slide that actually exists here are the registered practitioners, and then the registered practitioner organizations, as I said. I think there has been a training program, provider that's been approved, but again, as far as I know, there's no formal classes or training opportunities yet for people to either become certified assessors or certified professionals. So here's a model of the CMMC structure, and it's very similar to 800-171, except this has 17 capability domains, and 171 refers to them as families, and there's 14 of them. But you can see it covers, everything from access controls to risk management, and in other areas as well. And each one of these boxes represents a series of controls that an organization needs to have put in place. When we look at the different practices that are involved, we can see CMMC has practices from level 1 to level 5. Level 1 is considered basic cyber hygiene, is made up of 17 practices. Level 2 is an intermediate step really to level 3. It has 55 additional 55 practices plus level 3 then has an additional, again, 58 practices, making up 130 total practices for going to level 3. Level 4 and level 5, this shows additional practices, but these are still under development, you might say, as I understand it, and they would be a relatively few number of organizations that would have to reach level 4 and level 5. If we look down here, we can see that it's the expectation. Originally, the expectation is said that it'd be approximately 40% would fall into the level 1 category. That's been contested to some extent, and I think there's a lot more activity right now anyway going on in space for level 3. But there's a lot more effort, a lot more practices required to reach level 3. So it's a lot bigger effort to get there, but that's where a lot of the work is being done. Level 1 talks about basic safeguarding of FCI, and then 2 and 3 of CUI, and then we'll explain what those two acronyms actually mean here on the next slide. So FCI is federal contract information. It's an information not intended for public release, but it could have sensitive information relative to the contract that's being awarded between an organization and a contractor or provider in the defense industrial base. And then CUI, controlled unclassified information, is considered sensitive but not classified. But it's information that the government wants to keep private. An example here is weapons test data or information about military personnel, but it's much broader than that. So much broader that there's a lot of concern, I guess, in ambiguity about just what is CUI. Now, there's a link here to the National Archives that lists categories of information that are considered CUI. But I can tell you the list is a long one. And in some cases, the CUI might be information that's generated within an organization that's working on a contract for the Department of Defense. So for example, I might be a manufacturer making a component for something else, for example. But in the process of making that component, there's other pieces that are involved in that might also be sensitive, and it's not in the original contractor specification, but maybe they're components of building, a widget. And in some cases, you might look at it as what makes up a component is the bill of materials for a component in manufacturing space, or the recipe, if you will, and the items within that recipe themselves could be considered CUI. So in that case, the government's not designating what it is, but you within your own organization would have to know and understand and designate it as CUI data. So we break this down and looking at level 1, and level 1 refers to security processes that are performed within an organization. and they may be somewhat ad hoc. So those 17 practices or 17 controls that make up level 1, an organization may be doing all 17 of them, or should be doing all 17 of them, get level 1 certification, but they may not have documentation to support it. May not have written processes or procedures, things that they just do. And they would have to demonstrate, in order to be certified, they'd have to demonstrate that they're doing these things. But again, they're not necessarily mature processes, and they're ad hoc. There's no documentation or written practices or procedures around doing these things. This refers to basic cyber hygiene and the protection of federal contract information, as I mentioned earlier, and consists of practices that correspond to those requirements that are specified in this basic safeguarding of covered contract information systems. So to repeat some of what I've already said, CMMC level 1 is performed. It's not documented, it's not managed, it's not optimized. There wouldn't necessarily be plans for improvement. It really means that companies implemented security. You can show the auditor that you've implemented security in the practices, but it doesn't have supporting documentation or improvement around it. In terms of the practices, I've noted here in red the 6 of the 17 practices that apply to level 1 or the level 1 domains. Now, there's some things that aren't in here that, in my opinion, if you were really talking about basic cyber hygiene, you'd still have awareness and training, and you would still have recovery operations, restoration, but they are not in that particular level. So let's break this down a little more. So level 1 has access controls that refers to passwords and PINs, restricting login, assigning user rights to the appropriate accounts, not sharing your network with a neighbor. And what this refers to is where you might be in a building with multi-tenant access or services that wouldn't be allowed in level 1. Not sharing your data with the world, keeping private what should be private, making accounts for each employee so you don't have generic accounts that people are using to access information, changing default passwords. That had to do with the configuration controls that I mentioned earlier. Media protection, taking care of disposition of media or disposal of media appropriately. Physical protection, stopping unauthorized people and supervised visitors, having a log of visitors, managing people's access that are changing functions or perhaps leaving the organization, for example. In the system and communication side, it would involve keeping your computers inside the firewall, acceptable use practices. For example, just because you can access something doesn't mean you should. Updates, patches, antivirus, threat protection, and then antivirus scans. So those are the areas specifically touched by level 1 in those basic and foundational level, which would be required, for somebody that's only exposed to federal contract information. In level 2, we go a little more into the documentation side of things. The practices here for intermediate cyber hygiene. So level 2 is that progression where processes are being made more mature, and you have standards and references, and a subset of the practices that refer to CUI data. Then in level 3, that processes are actually managed, requires the organization to establish, maintain, and resource a plan, demonstrating the management of activities for practice implementation. This could include, says may include, likely would include information on missions, goals, project plans, resourcing, training, and involvement of relevant stakeholders within the organization. So this is where it starts, doesn't start touching, but does touch the business as an entirety. So this is comprehensive, and this isn't just IT and security. This also involves business processes that may impact the management of controlled and classified information. Good cyber hygiene encompasses all the security requirements specified in 800-171. So you're at 110 controls at that point, plus the additional 20 controls that are required for CMMC that involve other standards and references to mitigate threats. So, are you considering level 1 or level 3? Well, you have to assume at least a minimum of level 1. So level 1 certification is the absolute minimum. Your customer, whether it's a tier 1 contractor, tier 2 contractor, will be required to specify in their request for information the required level. So when the contract is going to be awarded, as part of that request for information initially, it should express what level is going to be required for you to be awarded that contract. If you're going to be storing CUI data, level 3 is mandatory, a mandatory minimum. If you're storing CUI today, you should already be there. So again, going back to that December 2017 date, the assumption is, the expectation is that you've already implemented the 800-171 controls completely. So how do I know? How do I know whether this impacts me or is impacting me? And the answer to that is look at the contract. Take a look at your contracts. Take a look at even your purchase orders, and you will see, references to different types of information within that. For example, this one example here shows a reference to this website, and the information that involves, in this case, a master solicitation revision -60. But what you want to look at is section I and the contract clauses that are in there, and you'll see this reference here referring to the 252.204-7012 clause, and it is included in the contract by reference. And then in this example, you see the DFARS link that the detailed information is available at. And then section B also has a reference to acquisition information at this website. So you want to take a look at that. Now this is a contract. This is section I, and this is a recent contract information that was added because of the interim rule. So you see the reference here to NIST 800-171, and you'll see under here in definitions, it says basic assessment. It means a contractor's self-assessment the contractors implementation in this SP 800-171 that is based on the contractor's review of their system security plan, which means you have to have a system security plan, and it's conducted in accordance with 800-171 DoD assessment methodology, which there's a document that's available for that. And the intent here is to use this information, system security plan, and the assessment methodology to generate a score for your organization to be noted in the SPRS system, and we'll touch on that as well. So, what should your next steps be? And by the way, this is not the end of the presentation. This is kind of just wrapping up this particular section. Start with CMMC level 1 validation, and note that you are doing all of these things. And I'll expand on that here in a moment of what I mean by all of these things. And in particular, when you're looking at system security plan and the information that you have to say that you are doing, that you're in compliance with, there are multiple steps in almost every one of those controls. But anyway, strongly suggesting that you should at least go through the CMMC level 1 validation, even if you're not currently doing business with the DoD, because this is starting to permeate other industries and other practices. We're seeing it show up in the automotive sector, in other areas that are starting to have stricter requirements for handling confidential information. Strongly advised yes.
I'm sorry, we have a couple of questions, so I don't know. Do you want me to wait till you finish with this slide, or?
Yeah, let me finish this slide, and then
Okay.
certainly we can answer the questions. Strongly advised third-party assessment assistance. And I say that because a lot of organizations are, recognized very small organizations. They may not have an IT department. They may not have security people. They're probably contracting these roles out, and to have an advisor to help you work you through this process is highly recommended. And consider ongoing services from a managed security services provider, which could also be the advisor or consultant helping through the bigger process. And consider, even though CMMC level 1 is referred to as basic cybersecurity, it's missing key controls, in my opinion. Normally, that would be considered best practice from a security implementation, including training and awareness and backup and recovery. So that's a good place to stop for now, and certainly take any questions.
Okay, thank you. The first question, Lisa asked, so if DFARS is in the contract clauses, but no CUI is involved, will they need to be at level 1? Is that correct?
If DFARS 7012 is in the contract clause, the assumption is that there's CUI data involved. So that would be level 3.
Level 3, not level 1. Okay. I think that answered her question. And the next one, Lisa, if you need more information, please type. And if you have questions, please don't do a direct message. If you can put it in the chat so everybody can see it. The next question is, will the government distribute information labeled by the government by information type? I don't know if do you understand what he's asking? Randall, if you could be a little clearer on that question.
Yeah, if the question is whether the government will designate the type of data, or whether it's CUI data. Of course, if you know, federal contract information would be involved regardless, but CUI data is supposed to be made a note of in the contract and labeled as CUI data, although in practice, I've seen many cases where that's not the case, that they don't know what is representing the CUI data.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's it for now. If there are any other questions, if you want to type them real quick. If not, I think he's going to move on. Thanks, Lauren.
Okay, you're welcome. So currently, state of assessments and roles. The question here is, are there organizations certified to do certification assessments? And yes, there's currently 2 that are designated as third-party assessment organizations. And you can find them in the CMMC AB marketplace. And then the link here is included for that marketplace. And this link will take you actually to the organizations that have received certification. And the last I saw, like I said, there were 2 of them. When will the CMMC AB certification process start? There's no assessments currently being completed by the C3PAOs. There's no trained certification assessors. And, you know, as I saw in the graph earlier, this was intended to start this winter, this spring, 2021. It obviously hadn't happened in the winter or spring, and we're well into summer now. I note here perhaps starting in the second half of 2021, but that's really just a guess of the earliest. And I say that because, like I said, there's no certified assessors yet even that have received the training in order to do the assessments. And what about organizations that can provide risk assessments that help us get ready for certification? There's registered practitioners and registered provider organizations are available today and listed in the marketplace. And I'm a registered practitioner, and the organization I work for, Centricom, for example, is a registered provider organization, and they can help you know, with risk assessments and with advising the steps to take to be prepared for CMMC certification. Some of the assessment concerns. Some industry studies suggest that CMMC compliance may come with expensive cost, burden, and possible bottlenecks. Well, the bottlenecks are because of the lack of certified assessor organizations and certified assessors. That's a large part of what could be bottlenecks, are bottlenecks so far. There's a lot of steps that have to be taken place by an organization to become get prepared for certification. So from a burden perspective, there is a lot of work, and there's some substantial costs that are involved. And I've heard a number of different numbers. So I don't pretend to know what that is going to be. I don't think anybody really knows yet what that's going to be, but some of the numbers are tossed around were for certification, you know, $30,000 to $100,000, depending on the size of the organization that's involved in complexity. And that's just a wild guess at this point. I don't think it hasn't been done, so nobody really knows. Perception of SMB readiness is significantly inflated. This is something that really kind of blew my mind, I guess. But even when they were early on, when they were talking about 800-171 implementation, there were comments within the government made that suggested that organizations really were were already doing most of these things, that they were already substantially prepared, and it was more a matter of tidying things up and maybe some documentation and maybe a few controls that weren't in place that should be in place. And for the vast majority of small and medium businesses, I think there's, that's not even close. At least in my experience so far, that hasn't been close. So there's, and even now, there's perceptions being made that, because organizations should have been ready, completed with 800-171, 3.5 years ago, that they're substantially prepared today. And again, that really hasn't been the case in my experience. Another anticipated obstacle is the bottleneck. And I mentioned that under the interim rule that was passed there in last year in September and went into effect November 30th, there were 300,000 contractors supporting the DoD estimate that have to undergo assessment. Now, that's an awful lot of companies that have to not only meet these control requirements, certification requirements, but then also actually be certified. That's a pretty heavy load. And then the last bullet, the strengthening national security and supply chain resiliency by improving DoD cybersecurity certification. Report involving 108 manufacturers found that 24%, or nearly 1 in every 5, said they might be forced out of the supply chain due to expensive compliance costs. And we have to remember that the vast majority of organizations in the defense industrial base are small and medium businesses, and many of them are very small. 10, 15, 20, 25 employees, and sometimes even less than that are providing very, very critical services to the Department of Defense. So talk a little bit about the new interim regulation, DFARS interim regulation. So a few items here. It says the contractor shall insert the substance of this clause, and this was the clause that I showed back in the last contract example, including the paragraph, and all subcontractors, contracts, and other contractual instruments, including subcontracts for acquisition of commercial items, excluding commercial off-the-shelf items. Now, what this refers to is a flow down clause that, let's say, for example, you're being awarded a contract and you depend on other contractors to help you supply your service or develop your product, whatever the case may be. Well, in your contracts with them, you have to have this clause in those contracts as well. And ultimately, you're responsible for them having become certified at the level that's required for them to be certified, whether that's level 1, level 3, whatever the case may be. The next clause, contractors shall not award a subcontract or other contractual instrument as subject to implementation 800-171 security requirements in accordance with clause 7012 this contract, unless subcontractors completed within the last 3 years of basic self-assessment. Now, this is where this, and we'll talk about it down here, this SPRS database comes into play. And what this is saying is that at this point now, in lieu of CMMC, the expectation is that you will have a self-assessment done and you'll work through the DoD assessment methodology and you'll obtain a score. And the score will be somewhere from a positive 110, meaning everything is done that absolutely needs to be done, which it could go all the way down to a negative number based on what's actually been implemented, what you claim's been implemented. And if you don't have this, and if you don't have this in place, this SPR score in place, you can't be awarded a contract. Now, this score can only currently can only be seen by the DoD. It can't be seen by our competitors or others, but certainly there's a scenario that suggests that if you do this assessment and you generate a score of 60, and you have a competitor that's generated a score of 80, well, it's reasonable to think that the competitor would likely be awarded the contract rather than you, based on that score, based on the DoD's interpretation of that score, and then the contract administration. Now, if you currently fall under DFARS 7012, you currently have that in your contract, then you may have received a letter like this. And I'm gonna make this bigger for you. So this actually came to a customer from the Defense Contractor Administration, and basically it says that, and I'm going to jump down here to this fourth paragraph, saying in order to comply with this contract clause, you need to either submit a documented system security plan and a plan of action that proves their compliance with 7012, or complete a voluntary basic self-assessment through the SPRS website. And then there's the link for that website. So this is where you'd have to go to put the score in. And if you note here, the requirement was for this company to respond to this requirement by the end of February, and let the Defense Contract Administration know that you either provide them the information with system security plan and the other data, or let them know that you do in fact have a score published in the SPRS website.
Lauren,
Yes.
we have another question that has come through.
Okay.
Is there any information out there concerning different types of contractors, i.e. manufacturers versus service providers?
Well, in terms of CMMC, it all depends on that you have to have that minimum of a level 1, and if you're going to be doing, you could be doing work on a government installation, and maybe you're a landscape provider. Well, a landscape provider would still have to conform to level 1, because they would have federal contract information. And if you're another type of business, perhaps I wouldn't expect a landscape contractor to have CUI data, but a manufacturer may very well, and then of course they would fall under level 3. Now 800-171 that we're talking about here now applies directly to CUI data. So regardless of the type of business that you're in, if you're managing CUI data, you're required to conform to the interim rule that was put out at the end of last year. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah, Randolph, if you need more, you can type something else in the chat. Thanks, Lauren.
You're welcome.
Oh, that did answer it. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. So here to the Supplier Performance Risk System, SPRS. This is the authoritative source to retrieve supplier and product performance information assessments for the DoD acquisition community to use in identifying, assessing, and monitoring unclassified performance. Now, this reads as though perhaps these other entities have access to this information, but that's not the case. Like I said, currently only the DoD has access to the actual score. But I was listening to some experts talk yesterday, and there is a reasonable expectation that the contractor themselves could ask a supplier what their score is, and you might have to provide that to them in a secure fashion, so that it doesn't become public information. But it's reasonable belief that before they awarded a contract, that they would ask what that score is. The advice also was that at least initially they did not have a score of 110, because it's not very likely that a lot of organizations have reached that. There is opportunity to have multiple entries in the database with different scores. So, if you progress from, say, a score of 60 to a score of 70 to a score of 80, that's perfectly okay, and it shows some improvement in the process that you're doing. By having the highest score initially, it might be looked at as, a little suspiciously, I guess. Just information that was shared yesterday. And you'll see that I have bolded in here that this is referring, specifically to 800-171 assessment results. And this is a self-assessment. So you do the self-assessment, or you do assessment with assistance of a third party, still considered self-assessment. You enter your score, and you enter a date when it's estimated that you'll have the controls in their entirety completed. So as you saw a couple of times, there was reference to the system security plan and the need to have a system security plan. And frankly, you cannot do this, go through this assessment methodology and generate a score without having a system security plan. And that plan is a documentation that outlines your function and features of the system, your hardware and software installed, detailed processes for auditing the system, and really much, much more. So there is a NIST template for the system security plan. There's absolutely no requirement that your security plan be structured like this template is. However, the template seems to be what people are using, at least the ones that I've seen so far. So it probably would be wise to use that template. And I've given a link there where you can obtain the template from. So some of the items that's in this system security plan: general description, purpose of the system, what's the function, what's the purpose, number of end users and privileged users, a general description of CUI information types that's processed, stored, or transmitted by the system. And and then here again is that link for CUI registry on what constitutes CUI data. Also, you're going to have a reference and complete accurate listing of all hardware and all software and other components of the system. And then, of course, what the product is, what the model number is, service packs, etc. So you have complete information of what's within your infrastructure and whether it's current and accurate and up to date. And list all software components installed on the system, which I mentioned. Limit system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users and devices. So this would require you, of course, to have documentation on who are the authorized users and the processes, etc. Limit system access types of transactions and functions that authorized users are permitted to execute. And this applies to the database or the application or services in particular that might contain CUI data. Now, when we talk about saying that I comply, this isn't, with a lot of these controls, this isn't necessarily just one item. So I wanted to give you an example here. This is referring to NIST Publication 800-171A, which is is really an assessment guide, an audit guide, if you will, that shows for each of these requirements what the assessment objectives are and where some of that information might likely be contained within your organization. So, for example, 3.1.1 as security requirements, limit system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users and devices, which is what I had just read previously. That's in the system security plan. But underneath this, there's 6 items. And each of those 6 items have to be addressed in order to say that you comply with 3.1.1. So each of these has to have an explanation, and they each need to be referenced in policies and procedures, and then artifacts as well, showing, proving within documentation and processes and procedures that these are actually accounted for and being done, accounted for within your organization. And this is really important.
Another question has come through when you're ready.
Yes. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, the SPRS website displays there's a new version coming out on July 31st. What changes are anticipated, if any, in terms of rating and scores?
I honestly don't know the answer to that. I'm aware that they're making some changes, but I'm not aware of what those changes are.
Okay, thank you. Sue, hopefully, well, even though we just don't answer, okay. Don't know the answer yet. Here's another question. If we have multiple systems that could access CUI, do we need an SSP for each application, or just one complete SSP that applies to all of our system or all of our system?
That's a good question. I mean, you have to account for all of the systems in terms of data flow and how the CUI information is being stored and accessed and by whom. So that could be done within the same document. I don't know that you would need a separate system security plan for each of them, unless they're completely and totally separate systems. But a lot of the controls I would think would be common, and you could reference them within a single system security plan. Now I have heard of organizations that do have multiple systems that store, for example, CUI data, and they do represent those as individual systems. I don't know that it's necessary to do that, but it might be a matter of complexity too. How complex does your system security plan become if you have all of those systems that are included in it? But I think that could be managed. I don't think there's a requirement either way, I guess is the crux of the answer.
All right, Regan, if you wanted to add to that comment, just to put it in the chat. If not, we'll just go ahead and move on. Thank you, Lauren.
Yep, you're welcome. And here's just another example of this, the same type of thing. It's just 3.1.2 security requirements. limit system access to the types of transactions and functions that authorized users are permitted to execute. So again, you must address each of those individual items, sub-items A and B, in order to say that you actually have completed that particular security requirement. Now, here's where a little bit of the legal implications come into play here. There is potential liability by overstating or misstating any of the information that's within the system security plan. And as you can see here, there was a case, and there's been other cases where a contractor was charged with this False Claims Act. There's False Claims Act liability. And as it says here, a contractor's failure to comply with the U.S. government contract cybersecurity requirement. And in other words, the short of it is they've claimed that they are doing these things, and it's discovered that they're not. Which in that case, this could be considered a material non-disclosure and fall under this False Claims Act. So this is something that could be discovered from an audit, or perhaps an organization has had a security event of some kind and calls into question the controls that they have in place and whether they're really doing what they say that they're doing. And then the last bullet on there pointing out that periodic assessments are a must. This isn't a one and done, because things change. And, even to the extent that you've got 10 computers and you've updated to the latest operating system. Well, has that potentially introduced a new vulnerability that wasn't necessarily known before? So granted, it's going to fix some, but it also could introduce something new. So it is wise and recommended to have periodic assessments. And that concludes my presentation. We have a little bit of information on Centricom, where I work, and some of the things that we do, which is beyond the security assessments, general network and security products and services, managed services and support. And
okay, thank you.
Centricom's website, my contact information. So if you have other questions that you didn't get a chance to answer here, feel free to send me an email, and I would be happy to do my best to answer them for you.
Okay, we already have a question from Tina Davis. Why in the self-assessment does a not applicable count as a negative in points?
Well, that's a good question. And in the gotcha there is that if you choose not applicable, you have to state why it doesn't apply to you. So, and I seriously doubt that there's very few of them that wouldn't apply, at least to some component. But yes, they do have not applicable as an option for you to answer. And I think there's also other mitigating factors that could come into play, that maybe you're not doing exactly what it is asking the question of, but you have other mitigating circumstances there that allow that protection to be in place, or that control.
Okay, thank you. To the audience, are there any other questions for Lauren today? Why, yes, there are. Okay. If a company's, so this is from Lynn Child, if a company is working upon the NIST cyber protocols, how beneficial is this? And is this a good starting point to work towards CMMC?
Well, in general, if you're not a DoD, if you're not a DoD contractor, for example, 800-171 in particular is still a good route to take. And as we said earlier, it is becoming more of a requirement in other industries and not just the Department of Defense. From a CMMC perspective, there are other federal organizations that have already said that they were going to be requiring CMMC, and besides the Department of Defense. So the thought is that at some point, doing any business with the federal government, regardless of what it is, these requirements are going to fall into place.
So it's a good practice to plan on getting it. Essentially, yes. just do it.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Okay.
As a matter of fact, I think the Small Business Development Center has information on their website about implementing CMMC. I think it refers to level 1, but even they recommend, if I recall correctly, they recommend that organizations at least do level 1.
I think it's for the good of the business, especially going forward. Okay, I don't see any other questions going through. I do have a kudos. Thanks for the presentation and great information. And okay, here's one. Do you know if the expense to get CMMC certified will be deductible or reimbursable? Could that be like a business expense?
Yeah, that's a good question. And from what I understand, the thought is that organizations will, find a way either through product pricing or services to include this as an expense incrementally. Either through fees or that type of thing. I mean, there are some government programs that assist in having assessments done. And there may be other avenues of grants. I'm not sure of that, but eventually the consumer is ultimately going to pay a price for this. I'm sure, like any other cost that a business incurs.
Yeah, that just goes along kind of with what you were just saying. Jerry Evans, oh, I'm sorry, no, there's one above that, hang on. Lynn Child, is there any funding available to assist with risk assessments for those in the DoD supply chain?
Yeah, there is a program, I think it's an MEP program, sponsored program that does provide some funding for the risk assessments themselves. And I don't have a note right here. And Lynn, you may recall, I don't have a note in front of me of what that actual program is called. But there is some funding available and encouraging organizations to have the risk assessments done and then put in appropriate mitigation plans.
Could she Google something like MEP funding for NIST or for risk assessment?
Yeah, there's a formal name for the program, and unfortunately, I don't recall what it is.
I'll look and see what I can find out too, Lynn. We have your contact information through registration. So if I find out anything, this is Jill Nagy Reynolds, I'll send it over to you. Okay, Jerry Evans, I was unable to attend the first session. May we have the link to the previous webinar? Okay, you can actually get that by going to the OU PTAC website. And I see Sharon has turned her camera on. So Sharon, could you put that in the chat by chance?
Yes, I can do that. And it is not posted yet, but it should be posted within the next few days. And I will add the website to the chat.
Okay. And all of our previous webinars are also available on the OU PTAC website. So in case you wanted to see the other programs we've had this year, a lot of them are posted there. Okay, we have Nicole Ashley. As a small business, if we were going for a level 3, how expensive can it get to get certified?
I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, there's the initial assessment process, and and there's certainly a cost that's involved with that, and then the certification itself, there will be a cost that since none have really been done, we don't really know what that cost is yet. As I mentioned earlier, I think I've heard numbers, anywhere between 30,000 to 100,000 for the certification process, and that's going to depend on the level and the size of the organization and the complexity of the organization, as is the initial assessment. But then in between there, you have the cost of executing, the controls, and some of those could be internal costs, and some of those could be products or services that help implement those controls. And and that's pretty broad. That's really going to depend an awful lot on where an organization is today in terms of their security implementation, and what it's going to take to get them to the 110 controls for 171 or the 130 practices for CMMC. And that's a pretty broad range. I mean, that could be anywhere from 5 to a 5-figure number to more over a 3-year implementation cycle.
Thank you. There's a lot of interest in that MEP program. Randall, I see your comment. Good to see you on the training, by the way. Another one. Yep, I've got, okay. Lynn Child, funding is available from the Ohio Defense Manufacturing Community for digital transformation for manufacturers in the DoD supply chain. Cyber is under that. MEPs have that information. Lynn, I don't know if there's like a link you can put in the chat that people can click on. Yeah, I just have a lot of desire, a lot of comments for that program that you were talking about, Lauren. So
yeah, and I
knew send it to, yes, go ahead.
I knew Lynn would have some of that information. We were just talking about it yesterday. I just didn't have it in front of me. And that program is beyond just cyber. Cyber is one of the more recent components, fortunately, that's been added to that. There was a program previously with the MEP that lasted for 2 or 3 years, but expired last year, I think. But this new program, I believe, is a 3-year program, which funding is going to be made available.
Sharon and Lauren, this is Lynn. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, Sharon, I just sent you via your email the actual PDF, the flyer for the funding. There's actually 2 funding, and we just were working with Aaron Patrick, who is going to be the interim director for MEPs yesterday or earlier this week. And he told us about a second funding source. So real quickly, for those on this call, I did send the PDF of the first funding source through the Ohio Defense Manufacturing Community to Sharon. She can send that to all of you. And again, it is for digital transformation, creating effectiveness and efficiency in manufacturers in the Department of Defense supply chain. And cyber is a subcomponent of that. So don't get confused when you get that information. Cyber is under that particular one. And again, it's the Ohio Defense Manufacturing Community. I did put that name in the chat. The second one we just learned about earlier this week from Mr. Patrick is called digital transformation. It is not going to be available until the October timeframe is what he shared with us. And there's going to be a component of that under cyber. To support cyber as well. So the best way to keep up with this is to talk with some folks like Sharon, your local MEPs. They will know about this funding as well. And if you want to reach out to Lauren and me, we keep up on this as well because we are helping other organizations. And of course, funding is critical in order for you to be able to do some of these things. We're very aware that the SMBs just might not necessarily have the wherewithal and the financial ability to do some of the things that are necessary. Thank you for letting me share that with everyone.
Lynn, there's been a request. Can you post that PDF in the chat by chance? Or Sharon, can you do that? The plan B is we have an attendee list that we can just send it out to the attendee list as well. But let's see if we can upload that.
I'm not sure I can.
Sharon, I sent it to you as an attachment to an email because I'm not sure how to upload it to chat.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I was wondering if any of you.
Let me see if I can figure that out, but that's why I sent it to you.
Sharon, if she sent it to you, you can take control and post it, share your screen and post it.
I'll stop sharing.
And then everybody can take like a screenshot.
Yeah.
And that's a good idea, Shonda, and we can still send it out to you too.
Right, you can still, but at least they can see it now or take a screenshot.
I have it available if you want me to pull it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to open it.
She's a
However you want to do it.
Yeah, if you have it available, do you want to try, Len?
I can try. Let me see what happens here.
Okay, I have.
Do you have to make her a presenter? You have to make her a presenter.
I don't think so.
Okay, she can just share her screen.
I think.
We have another question, Lauren. Would there, and I'm not sure you would know the answer, but Amber Brown asked, would there be funding for a consulting firm that is working with the state and now they're requiring cybersecurity insurance and the cost is extreme? Is there anything that would help us? So it looks like it's a question about cybersecurity insurance.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Yes. Would there be funding for a consulting firm that's working with the state and now they are requiring cybersecurity insurance and the cost is extreme? Is there anything that would help us?
Boy, I don't have a good answer for that. The only, if I'm understanding the question, the only thing I could think is that depending on many of the insurance companies require, a questionnaire or information to be filled out that reflects what cybersecurity practices an organization has. And I think it's reasonable to think that what practices they have in place or don't have in place might influence the cost of that policy. So I would check into that and see if there's, if they can find out why they're paying the price that they're paying and if there's an opportunity to decrease the costs by, any kind of improvements that they might put in place.
Can folks see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, just a note, this is what the flyer looks like. And down below here, it says Mike O'Donnell. This happens to be the person that's in Northeast Ohio. There's a document for those of you that might be in Northwest Ohio for Doug Durley at the MEP there. So you'll get the flyer is basically the same. And what they're doing is they're marketing it with each of the MEP's contact information. So you'll want to find out who your local MEP is and work with them on obtaining this funding. And if you need assistance with that, reach out to Lauren or me, and we'll be more than happy to get you in contact with the right people. This happens to be the one for Northeast Ohio.
Very good. And
Sharon just posted the PDF in the chat, so you can actually download it yourself and save it. She just posted that, so you can download it and save it.
And please do note, it's not just for cyber. And that's important because if you look at this, you might not think it applies, but it does. According to Aaron Patrick, who is the interim director for MEP, he said that cyber is included underneath here. And Lauren, if you look at this has changed from the last document we had. They have updated this.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, it is different. But again, I want to stress, Magnet is just one of the MEPs. It's best for you to go to your local MEP or reach out to somebody like us that can help you facilitate this.
And it does mention cybersecurity in like the 3 o'clock quadrant of that diagram.
Hold on just a second. I'm sorry, I got out because I thought we were done. I apologize.
Yeah, someone just asked to repost the PDF. And then there was another comment about the cybersecurity insurance. Sue asks, on the cybersecurity insurance topic, is there any industry standard or practice where the cost will decrease if we get these certifications or levels?
I'm not aware of any particular practice, and that's likely to be by insurance company on how they decide to handle that. I would, with some of the conversations that we've had with insurance companies, it's reasonable to think that there may be some opportunity there for a fee adjustment if you're compliant and have the certification. I would hope that that's the case, but I can't speak, specifically for what the insurance companies are going to do. But I do know there's some discussion there. Now, having said that, there's been so many ransomware events over the last couple of years. Insurance companies have felt that impact and helping cover the cost of those ransomware events through the cyber insurance. So the pricing, as I understand it, in general, has been going up to help offset those expenses. But I would think that if you're certified, that there would be some advantage to that, but I don't know that for a fact.
And then Amber Brown, I'm not sure. Okay, that makes sense. I think it's regarding the cybersecurity insurance. So, and I just lost it. Okay, so we should look at the 801 and see what all we're doing and what more we can do to help mitigate those costs.
The 800-171, if that's what she means, I agree.
Okay, very good. And Sharon, it looks she just downloaded the PDF again, so hopefully everyone can download that and save it onto their computers. Okay, Amber's saying thank you. Yes, Randall says thank you, very informative. Any other questions, anybody? All right, well, we're waiting to see if there's any more questions. I just want to say thank you again very much to Lauren. It's a very complex topic that I think that it helps to hear it multiple times. It's a huge thing that small businesses are having to tackle. So thank you for your time today. It's very much appreciated.
Well, thank you, and I'm happy to do it.
And I want to let everyone know that SBA and PTAC have partnered in August. We're switching our focus to manufacturing for August. So on August 4th, we've partnered with DLA Land and Maritime for a training on the Hub Zone program and how DLA fits into that, and what DLA is trying to do to get Hub Zone business. Then we're going to have a training. I believe the last two trainings are still in the works, so I'm not going to really put anything in stone, but mid-August, we're doing something on the non-manufacturers rule. And then we are at the end of August, we are going to have a panel discussion between manufacturers, like small business manufacturers, on best practices. So hopefully you all can join us for that. I would love to see you there. But if we don't have any other questions, I think we'll wrap it up for today. All right, that seems to be all that we have. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Shonda.
Thank you, and have a great day.
Yes.
Thanks for your help there, Lynn.
Yes,
Oh,
thank you, Lynn. Absolutely. Yes, thank
You're
you.
welcome. I would be more than happy if somebody wants to discuss anything about insurance. We're working very closely with an insurance organization that's in multi-states, and I can share some information, but I'm not an expert, so I hesitated to say anything, Sharon.
Okay, well, and that's okay. Until we actually have the information, it's better just to kind of keep it basic. Someone just asked, did I hear something about funding available? Okay, Joe, if you look at the chat, we downloaded the Ohio Defense Manufacturing Extension Partnership, the Ohio NEP. That's what we were talking about in terms of assistance with CMMC. And Lynn, how can people reach you if they want to? Do you have an email address or something that you'd be willing to share?
I just put it in the chat. And then also,
There it is.
Sharon, since there's so much interest about insurance, Lauren and I, we work really, really closely with one of the larger insurance organizations in the region. And I know if you would be interested, since there were so many questions, we could arrange a seminar like this, maybe not 2 hours, but they could go over some of the aspects of insurance for folks about cyber. And we're going, my company, myself right now, we're going through our cybersecurity renewal, and we just had that review earlier this week. So we're actually going through it as a company, and then we're also helping other organizations fill out questionnaires for insurance because they're becoming so complicated. So if you would think there would be value and enough interest, we would be more than happy to make that connection. And then maybe we could put something together to address the insurance questions. It's just an idea. If there's no interest, that's fine.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Well, and actually this is Jill from SBA. Sharon and I work together. So we meet on a regular basis to talk about training topics. So we'll definitely discuss that with each other.
Oh, okay, Jill, thank you. And I thank you for identifying yourself. I wasn't sure.
Well, I didn't do that this time, so that's totally my fault, not yours.
Well, and I'm just really grateful you're doing this, because it's amazing how this is moving very, very quickly. And Lauren, our goal has always been to just get the education out. Even if you don't contact us, just help folks know, just like what Sharon and you are doing, Jill. It's incredibly important.
Definitely. It's definitely the future. So the way that things seem to be progressing in terms of the cyber attack. So All right, very good, everybody. It looks like I'm interested. Okay, there's some audience members that are interested in cyber insurance, so you might have something there, Lynn.
Well, we'll defer to you. And again, it's just an idea. If there's not any interest or value, it's just throwing it out as a suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you. We really appreciate it.
Okay, very good. I am going to sign off here, but the recording will be available in about a week's time. So have a good weekend, everybody.
And you as well. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
All
Goodbye,
right,
everybody.
thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.